Welcome back to rogersarnt, and I'm your host, Sergeant First Class Cruz. And today, I'll be walking you through the 8-step training model and show you how to apply it to common tasks in the Army. This makes your training a lot easier to plan and execute. So as always, I don't want to waste you guys' time, so let's get started.
Roger, Sarn!
A lot of times, leaders, soldiers, many people in the Army think that the 8-step training model is a model that's used for large-scale trainings, and that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, when I was a BLC instructor, we had a class in which we taught our junior leaders the 8-step training model because this is used for when we conduct individual training, right? So there was a class and we give them an exercise when we first start. They come in, sit down. Hey, you guys break up into groups, go to each easel board, and we're going to give you a scenario. And our scenario that we did in our class was something like kind of fun for them. So plan a concert and who you're going to bring, and you have this amount of money only. So they would do their planning. It'd take about 10, 15 minutes. And then when they're done, we say, so how'd you guys come to your planning conclusion? And they would tell us. And then here's the introduction of the 8-step training model. And many of them be like, oh, I've heard of it, but I've never used it. I didn't think that it was relevant to this. So needless to say, that is not just training, period, this can be applied to. So step one, you have to plan your training. You have to identify who is going to be trained. So when you want to identify who is going to be trained, let's say, for instance, I'm in a cavalry battalion, and I just want to train Alpha Troop. So we're going to train for land nav. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify who is going to be trained, and we're going to identify all junior soldiers in Alpha Company. And then we're going to see, the next step is we're going to see what medal assessment, right? What is the medal assessment? And medal just stands for Mission Essential Task List. And every brigade, battalion, company, we all, and even platoons, we all have some type of mission essential task list that goes from the individual level all the way to the collective level. So we identify that and we identify those task numbers that we're going to train, because we're going to use those task numbers later on. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to identify the instructors and the assistant instructors. And typically we'll identify NCOs to train, because that's what we do, right? We train junior leaders. So we identify who are those going to be, and then we're going to identify the date the training was planned. So when do we start training? And then the next thing we want to know is, when is the training going to be executed? Because if we know when we want to execute the training, we start backwards planning. Next thing is going to be is we're going to have to secure the site. So we have to ask ourselves, is the site secure? And when it comes to securing the site, it's not just securing the land navigation course itself, but it's also securing the classroom. It's also securing the practice site. So it all goes encompassed into the planning. And the reason why we want to identify classrooms and practice sites along with the land navigation course is because we have what's called the crawl, walk, run phases. So crawl, you get your classroom instruction where everyone gets the didactic portion and gets trained and taught what to do. The walk is where you practice to identify your deficiencies and address them. And then the run is when you're actually evaluated. Then the next thing that we want to ask ourselves is, are all the resources coordinated? When it comes to a land navigation course, a land navigation training, obviously we're going to need compasses, protractors, pencils, map markers, maps, clipboards, and test sheets. And then the next question we're going to ask is, are the material training aids, what are they? Which ones are required? And in this one, we'll just use easel boards, obviously compass, maps, and then we'll have to set up a pace counting sites. Last thing you want to do in the planning phase is you want to do a deliberate risk assessment worksheet, also known as a draw. Any and every training you conduct in the military, in the Army, you need a deliberate risk assessment worksheet. That gets drafted by the trainer, and then it gets signed by the commander, making sure he makes sure that all risks that are identified are mitigated. That's step one. Step two, train the trainers. Questions you want to ask yourself are, has the trainer's training outline been reviewed? That just means when you have a skeleton, you're going to start plugging in a bunch of trainings in which you're going to abide by. So it kind of gives you a course to navigate through. Get it? Land navigation course. All right. So is the next thing you want to ask yourself, is the trainer technically and technically proficient? Are they knowledgeable in their tasks that they're going to train? Then the next question you want to ask yourself is, does the trainer have an understanding of the task conditions and standards? And then the next thing that you want to do is review the FMs, TMs, and all soldier manuals. This is just where all trainings are found. Every training that you conduct, there is a actual go or no-go criteria. There's a training step-by-step in which you follow. Many leaders have become very comfortable with the trainings and they just go off the top of the dome. I myself don't really like that. I prefer to at least have the training manual there just in case I forget something, because we're all human and we tend to forget, and it could be something that you just look bad in because maybe a soldier has actually done their homework. Be like, hey, Sarge, you forgot about this, and it may be a crucial step. So having those manuals and reviewing them and referencing them and understanding them is going to be crucial. And you have to make sure all your NCOs that are going to be conducting that training are familiarized with that. The next thing you want to ask yourself is the trainer's evaluation procedure in compliance with the training objective? And we had a lot of this when I was a BLC instructor. It's everyone has their tendencies in which they have more emphasis on and kind of more lenient. As long as what your criterias are don't conflict with the actual training criteria, go, no-go criterias, then you're pretty much in that left and right limits. You just have to make sure that the trainers understand which steps are crucial steps, critical steps that need to be passed in order to pass the training. And pretty much everyone has to be on the same page. That's the goal to train the trainers. Step number 3 is going to be recon the site. So the location of the training, whatever training area you're going to use, whatever classroom environment you're going to use, and whatever practice area you're going to use. Just make sure that you identify those, right? And reconning the site is just going to the site and ensuring that the site is able to be used. So a question you want to ask, is the site suitable for training? If you're trying to do land navigation and just so happens that site itself got rained out and there's a bunch of, it's just swamp in there, it's probably not conducive to training. Or some NCOs be like, hey, the more water, the better, right? If it ain't raining, you ain't training, a lot of times they'll say. But seriously, you want to make sure that the site is suitable for training. And then the next thing you want to make sure is it easily accessible for an emergency case? Every training that you're going to have some type of medical crew there with a medical evacuation vehicle just in case something happens and we have to get that individual to the emergency room. Now you have to identify these points of egress. The next step number 4, is going to be issue the order. The question you want to ask yourself is, has an op order been issued for training? And this right here, when you do the op order, this puts everyone on notice. Hey, this training is happening. In step 1, you want to do typically what's called a warning order, and that can be in the form of either an email, it can be verbal, but the most efficient way to do that is putting it in a memorandum format, sending it out to each company or battalions, their S3, and make sure that they understand that this training is happening. So when you issue the order, at this point is where you're going to identify what entities are responsible for what, because you want to spread the wealth. If you're conducting a training, especially at the unit level, you don't want to just take it all on yourself. So if you need to transport things, then you have to get vehicles. You want to see who's responsible for getting those vehicles there. So that's going to be identified in the op order. That also tasks the personnel. Because one thing in the Army, if you don't task someone through an op order, they will more than likely not do it. That's hands down, because word of mouth just isn't good enough. This is good enough for a warning order to let them know to start staging, getting everything prepared, but they're not going to do it unless it comes in the form of an op order. So the next thing you want to do is ask yourself, has the uniform for that training been briefed? And that's also going to go into the op order as well, right? Because you want all soldiers to have everything they need. And that's part of the uniform. So the compass is going to be part of the uniform, right? Their gloves, their protective eye pro. Sometimes they'll have you wear your LBE. It all depends. Whatever the uniform is, you're going to identify it at this moment, and you're going to put it in the order. The next step is going to be rehearse. Rehearse is crucial because at this point is where you're going to identify any pitfalls. So first thing you want to do is identify weak points in the training plan in order to make this training go better. The next question you want to ask yourself is there sufficient time for each training? If you're training, you want to make sure that you have ample time to do so, that no one's cut short, because that's when people have their doubts and start failing, and then the training is all for nothing. You've set this up for months, and then when you execute the training, it's subpar because you did not allot enough time for the classroom portion or enough practice time. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you have all the training aids and your materials. Make sure that they're all fully operational. So you just test them, make sure everything works. The worst thing that can happen is you are fumbling around with, let's say, this projector or something like that, and because you didn't identify it in the rehearsal portion, now you're stuck looking crazy in front of all these junior soldiers, losing credibility, and then you have to come up with 40,000 excuses on why you're not ready to conduct this training. Because when soldiers walk in, they're supposed to sit down and they're supposed to give you their undivided attention, be ready to go. So all these pitfalls, like I said, they'll be identified in the rehearsal. Then the next question you want to ask yourself is, did you review the pre-execution and pre-combat checks? And that's just making sure that each soldier, so each leader, make sure each soldier has everything they need to do, they need in order to conduct the training. And you will make sure that you rehearse that, because we will forget. We'll get these soldiers up on the LMTV, on the vehicle, on the transport vehicle, and just push them out there. And by the time you notice it, somebody of them forgot their gloves, somebody forgot their compass. Someone's going to forget something. And if you do these pre-combat checks and you rehearse those pre-combat checks, it becomes muscle memory and it stays in your mind. All right. So the next step 6, is going to be execute. Is the training conducted to standard? In the Army, we say we train to standard, not time, which is why a lot of times we go over on time, because questions arise, difficulty, somebody wasn't prepared, whatever it is, Murphy's Law. But we want to make sure that we get through the training itself and make sure the soldiers are prepared for the next step. And then when you execute the training, the next thing you want to ask yourself is, are soldiers for training accounted for? Easiest way to do that, hold the formation. Typically is about an hour, maybe 2 hours early, because Murphy's Law, like I said, someone's going to forget something. They got to drive somewhere and get it. And this is where the old hurry up and wait comes in. It's not really a hurry up and wait that's going on. Is the fact that leaders are making sure that they have enough time to address any deficiencies before it's time to go. And then, of course, is everyone in the correct uniform? Next one is going to be evaluate the training. So the question you want to ask is, was there an evaluation done after the training? Sometimes, and I'm not going to lie, a lot of times we will just do a training and we won't do the actual testing portion. And that's a no-go. So we have to make sure that happens. The next question you want to ask yourself is, were the training objective standards met? Did you do what you set out to do? And if not, then the whole training was a failure. And then it ties back into the plan. What is the medal assessment? So did they pass? Are they trained? All right. So the next question you want to ask is, what is the training medal assessment? And the training medal assessment is nothing other than what we call TPU. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, were the material training aids sufficient for the training? Did you have everything you needed for the training? If the answer is no, you got to write it down in the AR and use that for future references. Which brings me into my next question is, was an after action review done? Many times we don't do this. We skip over this and we just keep it moving. But in order to get better, you have to identify what went right and what could be done better. And back in the day, it'd be give me 3 ups, 3 downs. Now, the easiest way that we teach it is what went good. And you just let everyone just exhaust themselves, and then what could have been done better. And then you let everyone exhaust themselves. You take that back and you put it into the system along with your training. Then the next thing is, are the training results recorded in the leader's book? Every leader has their leader's book, which has all their soldiers' information, and you record those results in there and make sure that you are tracking what your soldier is good at, needs assistance with, and everything of that nature. Last step, retrain. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this step get just breezed by. No one wants to do retrain. Is if you pass, you pass. You didn't. Especially if the majority passed. So retrain is be prepared for opportunity of training, right? So when you do not complete the task successfully, you take account of that, and then you're supposed to take them back and redo it. Kind of like when you go to an M4 range and you're trying to qualify on your weapon. If you don't qualify, they take you off to the side, and then they go through your basic rifle marksmanship skills, and they get you ready to go get on the line again. That same concept is supposed to be applied to any training that you conduct. And the last thing is review references of FMs, RTEPs, and TMs. The reason why it's there again is because the NCO and the soldier, or the soldiers, can all look at this and go back over it and identify where is it that they messed up on, especially if it's something like plotting, dead reckoning, shooting an azimuth, whatever it is that soldiers say, well, I could not do this because I didn't get it, or I lost it, pace count, whatever it is. You identify that, and then you go back into it, and then you kind of retrain them on that. That's it for today's episode of the Rogersarnt podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review the podcast. You can also like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram at Roger_Sarnt. You can friend me on Facebook at rogersarnt. And lastly, you can follow me on TikTok at rogersarnt. If you have any suggestions for the show, you can email me at rogersarnt@gmail.com. Until then, this is Sarnt Cruz signing off the net. And don't forget, you don't have to embrace the suck if you got the right tools in your ruck.
Rogersarnt!